Phil Reilly, welcome to The Unfair Fight.
Thank you.
So for those that don't know you, longtime, CIA paramilitary officer, SF officer, I'd love to read a little bio for the audience, just to kind of tee you up and kind of get into it. So, Phil, you're a 29-year, actually more than 29 years, right?
Yeah, just under 30, yeah.
Just under 30, 30-year veteran of CIA, prior service, U.S. Army Special Forces. You're a paramilitary officer, served in various positions, including Chief of Ground Branch, Chief of Special Operations Group, which housed CIA's paramilitary ground, air, and maritime assets, and ultimately the Chief of Special Activities Division. Pretty high consequence job there, I assume. And under that, you handled CIA's paramilitary as well as covert influence organizations. And then you also were Chief of Station, including COS Kabul, Baghdad, and various positions around the world. And then also the Chief of the CIA Counterterrorism Center. I think you're most notable for serving, as the Deputy Commander of CIA's Jawbreaker team, which was the first team into Afghanistan post 9/11, it's a small group there. So, Phil, I'm absolutely delighted to have you join. I've been looking forward to this one for a while, and we'd kind of love to get into it and really kind of start, back in time. Like, how did you enter the military? What made you want to go? Where are you from? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Malden, New York, Long Island. I was a good runner.
Yeah.
I was New York State schoolboy mile champ in '78.
What was the time?
4:11.7.
4:11.
Yeah.
That's pretty solid back then.
Went on a full ride to Georgetown University, where I studied liberal arts, government,
Right.
and international relations. And upon graduating, I went into the Army Special Forces as an enlisted.
Right.
Because I was on a pathway at the time that you could go directly to Special Forces if you passed all the wickets.
Sure.
And so that's what I did.
So when you joined, did you join knowing you're going to try and go the SF route? Or was it something where you joined and then kind of got selected to go that?
No. I knew exactly. I wouldn't have joined had I not been able to go on the path to Special Forces. Now, again, I would have been stuck in the military
Right.
had I not made it.
Right.
But no, I was on a pathway to go directly, again, assuming I passed all the training.
Sure.
That's the way it worked out.
So, obviously being an athlete, and so you're a track and field athlete at Georgetown.
Right.
Oh, very good. Did you think that helped prepare you a lot for, obviously it seems like the selection process, besides the mental and the physical, there's pretty big physical component.
It did, and Special Forces training is endurance.
Yeah.
Moving rapidly over land with weight. So no, being a runner, long distance runner, middle distance to long distance runner, it helped greatly. And I was a big guy, so I could handle the weight on my back too. So no, it was a huge plus.
Yeah, that makes sense. What did you find? Did you find there was other athletes in the selection process? Which type of people struggled the most, would you say?
Well, at the time, believe it or not, land navigation was one of the biggest
Really?
failure rates. And I'm not even sure nowadays how they do land navigation, given GPS and everything else that's out there. But that was map and compass in the day. And then some physical
Right.
difficulty for people not making the various marches and all.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so walk me through a little bit. So you kind of made it through the selection process. Where was your first post, and what was kind of your primary mission set?
Yeah, I was assigned to the 7th Special Forces Group, which is Latin America, Central America. Not that I had any background in that area, but
Right.
at the time, if you recall, that's when Central America was going strong, and
Right.
7th Group was a popular group to send people. I was assigned to what's called a HALO team,
Okay.
high altitude, low opening jump team, with a SATM mission, a special atomic demolition munition team. So we, at the time, in the U.S. inventory, there were backpack nukes,
Right.
and we were on a team that would jump those in, ostensibly to difficult targets. Again, we only trained; we never actually deployed one of them.
Yeah.
And I was part of the team that did.
Oh, that is absolutely fascinating. I mean, so what was the training like getting prepped to do, kind of halo jumps? And was it a big, heavy kit that you had to jump at altitude? Like, what's the kind of difference? Where does it become a, kind of high altitude versus, I don't know.
Yeah,
where folks normally jump
this
from?
is
Like,
long ago, but
Yeah.
but generally high altitudes, anything over like 12,000.
Okay.
Over 15,000, you're using supplemental oxygen.
okay, really?
A lot of our jumps were at 24,000 feet. Usually at night, obviously simulating the tactical environment you'd be in. And the kit was heavy. I mean, it is today as it was then. You're carrying a lot of weight. I was a demolitions sergeant or an engineer, and so I was carrying a shape charge and additional weight for bringing that device in. So yeah, it was a lot.
Now, I imagine and you probably can't talk, even though today we probably don't have these in our inventory, but what type of special training did you have to go through, handling a nuclear device?
The training was extensive.
Was it?
Green light training. It's still Googleable as green light training. It was very, very thorough.
Right.
You were tested frequently.
Right.
And even the minutia of things involved in it. And if your team wasn't certified, you were deployable. But anyway, yeah, very, very thorough training.
It's pretty wild to think in 2023 we had a team of folks. When was this? Early 80s?
This would be, 83, 84.
83, 84 that would jump out of airplanes with a nuclear weapon strapped to their back. Now, were these like a kind of probably can't talk about, but were these kind of sub-kiloton, kind of devices?
Yeah, we'll go into the
yields, obviously.
The yields, and I will also say we jumped trainers.
Right.
I mean, we were preparing for the utilization deployment. But everything was simulated with the exact weights and devices.
That's fascinating. There's not a lot of people you meet in this world that had a mission of carrying micronuclear weapons into combat.
Well, they did it with scuba teams too, so some guys were swimming them in. It was interesting times.
That's incredible. I mean, back there obviously I had quite a bit of background in the nuclear side, and so it's always fascinating to me to hear, kind of some of these stories. We had a wild array of weapons in the arsenal back in the day. I think it's a little bit simpler these days. So, so you're in. So this is 83, right? When did you join the kind of SF team?
I joined the Army in 82.
Okay, 82.
Mid 82, weeks after graduating Georgetown.
Right.
And then my 3-year enlistment was up in 85.
So it's only 3 years, really.
3 years at that. My enlistment was at that point. Now, I was thinking about re-upping.
Right.
I should say about the time that I was with 7th Special Forces Group, we operated in Central America.
Right.
I spent about 7 or 8 months in Honduras.
Oh, you did?
Doing some operations there, training of Hondurans and other governments. But again, my end of service came up in 85, and I strongly considered going back, re-upping as it's called. At the time, to try out for Delta, you needed to be on a second enlistment at a minimum.
Oh, is that it? Yeah, they won at least a full.
Yeah, so I was really tempted to do that, although the officer ranks were beckoning, and that would have been a different track taking me away. So
sure.
But at that time, I was going to tap on the shoulder. There was a CIA referent or LNO, located at Fort Bragg, and a storied old Vietnam vintage guy. And he just said, "Are you interested in this?" And I said, "I am."
Right.
And so I started the application process.
That makes me laugh even harder because you have a CIA guy forward deployed down to Bragg, whose job is probably like liaison coordination, but he's, of course, always recruiting.
No, you're right. He's not supposed to poach. He's not. And to be fair, I was going to get out, so he didn't actually poach. I should say, too, something I mentioned previously, that I was looking at the Navy, too, Naval Aviator Program at the exact same time. So I was going through the wickets while applying to CIA for the Naval Aviator Program. And I was one signature away from Pensacola, apparently, when the CIA offer came in.
Really? So why do you think they picked you? Why do you think they...
CIA?
Yeah.
I think some of my background, obviously Georgetown didn't hurt, Special Forces, but mainly... CIA was engaged at that time in the Contra effort. Central America was very important to our country, and getting people that were knowledge of the region and can be turned around and used there made sense. That's exactly what they did.
Right. And so when you were recruited into CIA, do you think were you recruited to go right into the paramilitary unit?
Yes, I was looked at for the paramilitary.
Yeah.
And in fact, I went in directly to the paramilitary. I didn't go to the career trainee program, which is what most people come in on the operational side. I was not slotted for formal tradecraft training initially. I went straight to the paramilitary ranks and didn't get my tradecraft training or operational training for several years later.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And so,
and that's different today. If you came on board today, there's a plan for our paramilitary people coming in.
You go right.
And they're slotted. Well, it's all formatted and organized, as it should be.
Right.
It was not then. We had ad hoc onesies, twosies positions at what's called the farm.
Right. So, talk to me about. Obviously, in the paramilitary, my understanding is almost everyone has military training and a lot of heavy special operations. Like, what did you find that was different from a training standpoint? Going through kind of the farm, like as much as you can describe. Obviously, we won't touch on anything sensitive.
Well, you mean going through the operational training?
Yeah.
Well, completely different than military training.
Right.
I mean, there you're learning perhaps may not sound right, more cerebral.
Right.
You're learning how to do things that you didn't have a background in: spotting, assessing, developing clandestine assets, recruiting people, reporting, how to report effectively, and handle assets. So that's all the training that you go through, and that's all new.
Right.
Now it's paramilitary in the sense that it's a hierarchical organization. You're in a group of 50, and it's rather competitive.
Right.
But very thorough training.
Right.
I did well at it, but I certainly didn't excel. I wasn't the top of my class.
Right.
But there were some brilliant people that I was going through that training with.
What do you think? What was the hardest part of the training? Did you find?
It's meant to stress you.
Right.
An analogy would be it's a ranger school, a cerebral ranger school. That's probably not really totally fair to the rangers, but there is a hard grinding aspect to it. So they want your last minute reporting requirements at midnight or something. They want to press you, put you under the gun, throw operational scenarios at you that you don't expect, and see how you react.
Interesting. Yeah. And sleep, was it something like nice to have more?
More so. Again, it wasn't hard at all. Some people breeze through it. When I say you deal with people that were remarkable, some people just were not.
What do you think the traits were of those folks?
Well, I think good writers. I mean, you want to be a good writer. If you're going to be a successful operations officer at CIA, you have to write, and maybe a little counterintuitive. You want to be a good recruiter and handler of assets too. However, you got to be able to record and document and transmit back what exactly transpired. So people can write rapidly and concisely. That's a very, very good trait.
Good memory, too, I would assume.
Having a good memory, you're spot on.
I find one of the hardest things sometimes is, taking notes during a conversation and then going back and reading them, trying to make sense of them. It's a skill. It's a little bit tricky because you're also having to be in tune with the human. You're kind of
you're exactly right. Knowing what to write down. Yeah, I still struggle with it.
Yeah, me too. It's a tricky. So, obviously you're in. An operator, you head into CIA, and you go through that training. Are there any traits you learned from that training that you found useful now in the commercial business world?
I think you don't know everything,
right?
And you're there to learn. And I mentioned already, you're going to be surrounded by people that are better than you and smarter than you,
right?
And to learn from them. Take the best strengths of the people around you and capitalize on them. Emulate them to the degree you can.
Sure.
Pick them up, but also realize that person's very good at X. We're going to keep that person focused on X.
Right. So the kind of classic, surround yourself with people smarter than you in their domain, and
Yeah, at least know who they are. Yeah. Exactly right. And to be honest, too, know those who may be a little bit weaker. And you're not going to put that person necessarily in a stressful environment, or that person may not be the right person to go down to a war zone.
Sure.
Now, sometimes they self-select that, but other times they don't know that.
Yeah, there's a podcast I was listening to, and it was a CEO talking of kind of a SaaS company, and what he said, I think it was something like 15 to 20% of your time as a CEO you should be spending recruiting and assessing and developing like the best next talent to come in and kind of round out your team. And so it sounds like it's kind of a similar mindset. Obviously, you guys are dealing in a much more physically dangerous and stressful environment, but that is kind of the best kind of analogy or corollary between the two worlds.
No, you're right. The other thing I say about the instructor staff, which were generally older, right? They had experience, but they were from a different generation.
Sure.
And this is a guy talking about going through the mid-'80s. I'm talking about people who were cutting their teeth back in the 60s.
Right.
And he goes, there's something to be learned. The scenarios were different.
Mm-hmm.
The wars were different. Technology was different. But the lessons that could be gleaned from those people were amazing. And I'm sure that's happening today. Young people are going through the farm today.
Yeah.
But people who were maybe early in Afghanistan or Iraq war people and may not see the relevance initially of those relationships or experiences, and they're all still very valid.
Oh yeah, there's no question. I think a lot of tech is a little different, but humans are still quite similar, and they have a lot of similar traits. I always joke, like when you follow humans for a living, like previously did, and that they never know they're being followed, you learn a lot about people really quick.
All right.
A lot of good, but a lot of bad and disturbing parts of what makes up the human brain. So how long? So you entered in the mid-'80s at CIA?
Yes.
So you pretty much had two major halves to your career. You had kind of pre 9/11 and post 9/11, where that you can talk about. Kind of what was your kind of path from kind of mid-'80s through the up to 9/11.
Sure. I started as a ground branch officer, and again, Central America was a big role. There was another series of activities in Africa, broadly under the rubric of Africa Bush Wars,
Sure.
where we engaged in activities like that. 90s, there was the Balkans.
Right.
A lot of activity there. I also did something that's very common now, is to go out and do what's called a conventional case officer tour. And
you did?
And I served overseas in Africa, doing what truly a conventional tour.
Sure.
Spotting, assessing, developing, and working conventional targets. So that was the 90s, really.
Okay.
It was, let's take Gulf War I in there.
Right.
There's some other very interesting, very busy time. Very
Right.
busy time. So the Soviet Union had collapsed, obviously, right? 90, and yet the world wasn't a safer place instantly.
Right.
We were readapting to the new world, and there were problems all over the place.
Not to mention a massive nuclear weapons arsenal in a failing state. Yeah.
No, exactly right.
It had to be stressful times.
Right. And terrorism was a factor then. The Counterterrorism Center of CIA was created in the mid-'80s. The director Casey.
Right.
And of course, this is way before 9/11.
Right.
But there were threats. We'd been attacked.
Right.
The Cole and a whole bunch of other early attacks at the World Trade Center and around the world. So there was a huge emphasis on things counterterrorist.
Right.
Nothing along the size or dimensions that it became after 9/11.
The
But
GWAT.
still, it was a big effort.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So kind of fast forward to, obviously a lead up, you mentioned the USS Cole bombing. There was, I guess the embassy bombings in
Embassy
Africa.
bombing in Africa.
So things were really starting to heat up, kind of leading up to 9/11. Where were you when the attack happened?
Yeah, 9/11, I was in language training. I was going to go out to be a chief in the Balkans.
Okay.
And I was learning Serbo-Croatian and on the morning, and that clearly was not going to happen after the attacks.
Right.
So like everybody at CIA, I could almost say certainly 100%, they all wanted to contribute to the effort in the aftermath. And so I contacted the Special Activities Division that I just left for this assignment.
Oh, so you had just left them.
Yeah, I was and they knew me very well. And ironically, because I was in language school, I was kind of a free agent.
Right.
Okay, that assignment was no longer that important, and so I got picked to be the paramilitary with the number 2 officer on the Jawbreaker team, which is going to be the team that we would insert into Afghanistan after 9/11.
So did you know you would likely get picked to that team, or was it a big surprise?
No, total surprise. I like everyone that I knew in the paramilitary ranks was trying to get into the fray. We didn't know what form the fray would take.
Sure.
The response would take. We knew we would play a significant role. But CIA had a plan. The Counterterrorism Center, George Tenet was the director. Covert Black was the director of the Counterterrorism Center. Hank Crumpton and other storied names within CIA. They came up with a plan to utilize some linkages and connectivity we had with the Northern Alliance,
right,
which was the one part of Afghanistan now controlled by the Taliban, is the northeast quadrant of Afghanistan, and we had a relationship. Had not been there in 6 months, CIA personnel, but we had a relationship with them. So the plan was to offer to the president, to insert the CIA team to the Northern Alliance, bring them to our side, prepare them for the introduction of large numbers of U.S. troops, and to hunt al-Qaeda, which were the perpetrators, obviously, of 9/11.
Of course. So why do you think the CIA got the nod over the military?
Yeah, that's a piece of history now, and there's a lot written on it. But my recollection, and this is probably borne out in what's on the internet and such. The DOD just did not have an immediate off-the-shelf response. Right. They had responses, but they were going to be lengthy in time.
Right.
It's build up the forces in the region and go in a very, in a manner that was not conducive to what the president wanted to do.
Got it.
So when George Tenet proposed something that could have people on the ground within days, he went with that.
So how many days was it from the attack to you landing your feet on Afghan soil?
Well, the attack, we landed on September 26th in Afghanistan. We could have gone earlier.
Right.
There's reasons why we didn't, to include some delaying actions in some of the stands, as we call them, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. that the Russians probably were delaying slightly some of the introduction, but we did go in on the morning of the 26th of September.
So talk to me about that morning. Was there massive anticipation, nerves? Like, what was your mindset? I mean, this is a pretty wild mission to head into, kind of a controlled little enclave within Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's 20 plus years now to think about it. I don't remember being nervous. I'd say that a lot was going in our favor.
Right.
The Northern Alliance, which I had not worked with previously.
Right.
2 days before the attack on 9/11, on the 9th of September, Ahmed Shah Massoud, the leader of the Northern Alliance, was assassinated by al-Qaeda. And he was a revered figure.
Right.
Revered. And so that really united the Northern Alliance. They wanted retribution. They wanted to go after the Taliban / al-Qaeda. And so there was never any question,
right,
and borne out on the ground, of them wanting to come to our side. So I wasn't really concerned about that. We were going to have to work through the issue of foreign troops, i.e. American troops, being on their soil, and how that was going to work out. That also ultimately worked out very well, but at the time we didn't know it.
Right.
Concern, the unknowns. Well, first of all, we had 10 of us, 3 air crew and seven members of the team. Gary Schroen was the team leader, a storied figure who knew the Northern Alliance and knew Ahmed Shah Massoud. He was the perfect person to lead it. And because we knew it was a heavy paramilitary operation, or heavy U.S. military operation, ultimately having a paramilitary officer as a deputy made complete sense.
Sure.
So that's how I was ultimately picked. We also took with us on that 10-man team, we picked up 2 Afghans.
Oh, you did?
An interpreter, translator,
Terps,
Amarul Saleh. And we also put a fellow in the cockpit who had been a helicopter pilot to help us actually navigate over the terrain. So we had an Mi-17 based in the region as a Russian helicopter.
It's a Russian helicopter, yeah.
It had recently been refitted quite a bit, but again, if you had you seen it, you would say that's been refitted. It was rather rustic, but serviceable, clearly. But I mean, put it this way, the navigation systems, the pilot used a small Garmin.
So it's a handheld Garmin with batteries.
He had taped up, so he's operating on that. So my concern was then, and frankly, it is at any of those environments, it's a helo crash going down, and we had to clear the Anjuman Pass, which is over 14,000 feet.
That's high for a helicopter.
The
helicopter must have had a lot of power.
It did have a lot of power, but we were heavy with crew and gear and auxiliary fuel tanks, but it made it, and so we descended into the Panjshir without a problem. We were met immediately by the new leadership, as it were, of the Northern Alliance, and greeted and got
been happy to see you.
They were very happy, and they gave us all that they could, which is humble in terms of sustenance and accommodations, but they gave us everything they possibly could.
So you guys, how many people on this team? 7 or 6?
There were 10 of us, 3 air crew, stayed with the bird, and then our 7-man team. Yeah.
Yeah, and so how long were you there? Like, what unfolded that you can talk about, obviously, once you got onto the ground?
The mission, again, was to bring them to our side, which was not a problem. It was then to start mapping enemy positions. So at the time, there was the Kabul front down in the actual Kabul proper, just south of us in the Panjshir Valley. And then to the west of us, we call it Takhar front. It was more to the northwest. And we started doing that. We started mapping enemy positions and pumping all that information back to Washington via intelligence reports. We also started to do what we talked about, prepping the way for U.S. troops. So the first Special Forces A detachments came in on 16 October.
So you were there from the 26th to the 16th, at least.
Yeah, at least. And
more Americans came.
Then more Americans came. One went up to the northwest to be with Dostum and Team Alpha, which became known as the Horse Soldiers. And one team came down with us, ODA, Triple Nichols, 5th Special Forces Group. Team came in and worked with us. And they brought in all their equipment. And we then worked together to do exactly what we said before. Plot the enemy positions.
Sure.
U.S. airstrikes actually started before the troops were on the ground. And they picked up, at the time, it seemed very slowly to us. They were being very careful in their target selection. But ultimately, the U.S. air power overwhelmed the static positions of the Taliban.
Sure.
Taliban's a guerrilla force. They were in trenches at that point,
right,
and very vulnerable to U.S. air power and us identifying their positions. So they quickly withered under the fire. The other piece of the mission was to make contact with all of our assets throughout the country.
Sure.
Some assets that we had, some assets that we used to have. Remember during the Afghan War One against the then Soviets, we still had warlords, factional leaders, people that worked with us or knew us. And of course, once they saw which way the wind was blowing, many wanted to join and help out. So reaching out to those people, the funding of those people, the funding of the Northern Alliance to enable them to help us with our mission, were all things that we engaged in.
So now, were you also involved in kind of training the Northern Alliance at all? Was there any training component, or is it mostly just like getting on your side and, kind of prepping the environment?
No training, and especially in those early days, the conquering or the retaking, as it were, of Afghanistan. No, there was none. We worked with what they had. I mean, in the subsequent 20 years, there was a lot of training to be provided.
Right.
Well, that's another podcast.
Yeah, that's definitely a longer podcast. So how long were you there?
My first foray there was about 45 days.
45 days.
And why did we come out? Gary Schrone had retired, hit mandatory retirement age when he was in the...
While he was on the ground.
Yeah, and he spoke with Director Tennant, who kind of humorously but realistically said, we're going to extend you for a bit. So Gary came back, and he came back not only to retire, but because his expertise and what he saw on the ground needed to be heard in person by national leadership.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful.
And I went back to become chief of operations of what had just been created, a new element called the CTC, Counterterrorism Center Special Operations. And they were going to run the day-to-day response to Afghanistan from the Counterterrorism Center in Washington. So I went to be the chief of operations under Hank Crumpton.
Okay.
And we supported the teams in the field at the time, numbered about, ultimately it was Jawbreaker, and then it was Team Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, all the way through Echo, maybe about 10 teams, co-located with Special Forces, 8 detachments. And this was communicating with them, keep them fed and logistically supported.
Sure.
Operationally and logistically. And
so CIA was taking a pretty big role in the logistics.
Oh, very, very big. Again, military at that point had its own capabilities, but they were still growing. They didn't have any bases in all the region. They were just creating.
Yeah, I guess when you think back, there wasn't a lot of infrastructure.
Yeah, there was very, very little in the area. Very, very little in the area.
So, as a kind of running ops there, what are your best lessons learned from starting to take over? So you're on the ground, and now you're starting to take over, a larger kind of infrastructure of humans. Like, what type of leadership traits did you kind of learn that you think really apply to the business world? Like, if you were kind of giving advice to a small, medium business owner, like, what lessons learned from there do you think they could apply?
Yeah, it's interesting. CTC's Special Operations component, again, was stood up, as I said, so it was weeks old when I got to it. And because we didn't have a ready cadre of people just waiting for this calamity to occur, they built this team out. And what they often do, CIA, and they did in this case, they take a lot of young officers, some in training, some not yet through their training, some recently graduated. And it was the most diverse, eclectic crew that I inherited in this little bullpen. And I mean, it was a cross-section of America. It did your heart good to see these young people, and again, completely diverse. It was phenomenal. There was a young kid when I went in the room, when I first got into the malt, this SO, I like to tell this story. It's a very young African-American, tall kid running around. I'm like, I don't know, who is this guy? And I said, he seemed very good. He must be a GS-13 or 14.
Right.
His name was Will Hurd. He went on to become a multiple-time congressman subsequently. But at that time, he had not even started his training. He was called what's called a pre-CST. He was prior to his training.
He hadn't been to the farm yet.
Hadn't been to the farm yet. He'd been on a series of interims, and we became friends. We were friends to this day. But that was the kind of eclectic group I'm talking about.
It's incredible. And then he went into politics after, and
got to do several tours.
He was a refreshing politician, I would say.
Yeah, not only that, he did say there's a lot of people who retire from CIA and go do other things, but will claim all sorts of daring do. But Will did real tours, real hard tours, and great work. He worked for me on multiple occasions. So, yeah, my hats are off to him. Yeah, we went out and had a thus far successful political career. We'll see what's next.
We'll see what's next. Hopefully he resurfaces. It'd be nice to see. So then you move on to some chief of station positions. How long were you at, CTC?
Yeah, I can't even remember. I'm really prepped for this podcast. I have to remember all these times. But first of all, You did say I was chief of station Baghdad. I was deputy chief of station Baghdad. Okay. Someone would be very upset if I missed.
Of course.
And I was not. And I was not the head of the Counterterrorism Center.
Right.
I was the chief of operations.
Chief ops,
which is essentially number 3.
Yeah.
You're doing the day-to-day control of the operation. Just to clarify that.
Of course.
So I was working in Afghanistan, but then things occurred. I mean, we had the Gulf War. We went to Iraq.
That's right.
And so ultimately I went out as a deputy in Iraq, Baghdad, which was huge at that point. Was the largest station,
right,
in the world. Ultimately replaced by Kabul,
right,
as the largest. But that was all consuming, and that was a mixture of not only helping support the warfighter in a insurgency in that country, but it was the counterterrorism mission.
Sure.
There was Iran meddling on
oh yeah.
So it was a difficult situation.
Yeah, and when was that? Was that during the thick of it in 06 and 07?
Yeah,
when Iran was really turning into a civil war?
I want to say 5 and 6 as deputy out there. Then ultimately came back and was chief of operations of the Counterterrorism Center, which was a fascinating job. It was a rare job at the time. It's all been reorganized now, but at the time that was considered like a component chief level.
Okay.
Because it was just Counterterrorism Center was so massive.
Yeah.
It's the largest and probably remains the largest entity CIA has ever had, sub-element. I hope that will be replaced by a vigorous China Mission Center at some point.
Yeah.
But I don't know where the numbers are. But it was huge. And because they were doing worldwide counterterrorism operations, I mean, it could be Hezbollah one day, it could be Al-Qaeda the next day. It was complicated. Liaison operations. That's where, back to a point I made earlier, where you have to rely on unbelievably good people.
Right.
The CTC was a place that bred people that stayed long term. So some of the key people had been there since the 90s. Some had been there since the 80s. Many had been there since the early 90s. Many were working UBL before anybody in America knew his name.
Right.
And the various operations actually that were abortive at times to go after him, even before 9/11. But he worked with people that were just so good at what they did. A lot of it was the targeting cadre.
Right.
A lot of them were women. I mean, it's who were just immersed in the subject matter and dedicated.
Yeah.
And the most obscure details they would have at their fingertips. It was very, very impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, there's one thing I remember very distinctly is if you rotate around too much, you can't develop elite level target expertise, and it really requires it. You need people to stay and actually professionalize, become fully dedicated, especially if you have to kind of be a combo of intelligence analyst or, kind of targeter, like to really kind of guide.
I agree with you 100%. And the only risk is that are open to new ideas.
Yeah,
they've done it the same
problem.
way. It is, and it manifested itself, unfortunately, more than once. That's the way we did it. That can't be the case.
Yep.
Well, that person has to be guilty. Well, maybe not.
Yeah. Yeah, I always remember the precedent issue. If you wanted a new style of op, it's like, well, we've never done this type before. Well, doesn't mean it can't be done. But yeah, the precedent was always a big deal back then. I remember that very clearly. So, I would assume stress was something in your career that you had to deal with quite a bit. Now, some people handle stress really well, no matter what the situations, and others don't, But if you kind of picture like a small, medium business owner, right? You start the company, like payroll, finance, a lot of times your home's up as kind of collateral. Like that's stressful in a much different way, but still, quite stress-inducing. What tools did you find to help you cope with that?
Yeah, there was not a conscious acknowledgement of the stress.
Sure.
Especially when you're younger and you're running 1,000 miles an hour. You're not thinking about that. I think the agency, by the way, is much more focused on that nowadays.
Are they?
They have a wellness officer. They're looking out for the workforce. I think in a too much greater degree. But at the time, you do things you may not even recognize. I mean, exercise and staying healthy, to the degree you could, despite the long hours. But it was stress, to your point. I mean, different than necessarily a business environment, but not that. If you got a new covert action program, or even a subset or a component of a covert action program who were responsible for it, you had all the recruiting, you had all the budgetary issues, legal issues, unbelievable.
Yeah, always lawyers.
Yeah, I think we had 10, at the high point in the Counterterrorism Center. And probably in the 80, 90, there was one, and
really?
It's unbelievable. Great people though.
Yeah.
Great people. That you find that lawyer who gets the yes.
I'll never mention his name, but there was one I remember working with, and I absolutely loved this guy to death because he always found a way.
Yep,
if that makes sense.
Yep, there's two names I could think of, and it's one of the two that you're thinking of. But I'll leave that as it is.
Yeah, big fan, because I worked with other ones. I was like, oh my gosh, I guess this is all reasons why we can't do it, but can we find a reason to do it?
You want to find a reason. CIA not do something. Yeah. There's plenty of reasons to do it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you just say no to everything, you may get an 80% positive career, sadly.
I know, isn't it kind of
wild? But you're going to miss a couple opportunities which could kill you, but it's sad.
So, obviously being in special forces and then elite paramilitary unit, there's a lot of high-performing individuals there. Like, one, how'd you manage the egos? If I had to assume there was some of that. Generally when you get a lot of Type A people together, it can be a challenge. And then what were the kind of traits you noticed that were common traits of high-performance, organizations, individuals that you also see now in the business world?
Yeah, it's a good point. First, I'll say about the people we recruited from the JSOC world, let's be strict, special mission units. There isn't the swagger. There's a humility,
right?
Because they've been through such training, and probably failed occasionally along the way,
of course. And
yet they've come out of it. So there's a humility that's is truly refreshing.
Right.
Not always the case, but yeah. So I think working with people like that and knowing the background from which they came, they do know how to handle stress. We talked about an office environment where it may be stressful. These guys handle stress in the most difficult of circumstances.
They sure do.
So the office shenanigans, don't rattle them.
Oh, that's nice. So you don't get too much of that. Yeah, I remember sometimes working with the military folks that weren't embedded with CIA. You always wanted to kind of help them navigate the CIA meeting game. I don't know if you remember that, because sometimes it would be challenging for them to quite, you get it, yes, of course we'll do that. It was not a yes. It was a real yes, if you know what I mean.
We had a storied COS, and it was a bit of a wild man. He sat down with a bunch of JSOC guys one time, and he went into his shtick, do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, and then this is going to happen, you can do this. And after he left the room, they all looked around and said, did he just pick our pockets?
Yeah. Probably.
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah. So when'd you retire from the agency?
I retired. I had a major European posting.
I did.
I'd like to say it was my only first world posting.
Right.
Everything else was in a less than a pristine location. But that was in late 2014.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was dealing with one of our critical liaison allies. Nay, our most critical liaison ally.
Right. Now, what'd you find from that? Did you like that role? Compared to the field stuff and
I did. I don't think that's was the best tour. It's an unfair question because I did some young things we can't talk about.
Of course,
I was younger,
of course.
That were great in themselves, even though I was a junior person. But being the chief of station, which we didn't even cover actually, in Kabul.
Okay.
In 2008, 2009, I was chief of station. So as we talked about, I'd been there with 10 of us on the ground and went back and the largest station in the world.
Was it wild to see how big it got?
Oh, yeah. Because I tracked intermittently a different sign than CTC and supported it quite a bit from the rear. However, yes, to be on the ground with the U.S. military in full vigor, with the embassy fully blown out, being rebuilt and brand new.
Yeah.
And I mean, so it was impressive to see. Plus all of our allies, all of our coalition partners with air and strength. So it was impressive. That's not to say it wasn't a lot of problems and issues that we had to work through. So that was a big change, but refreshing, and you adapt to it and you move on.
Sure. Now, in that role, did you find you worked very heavily with the other, kind of U.S. intelligence agencies?
Oh yeah, very much so. When the U.S. government, the counterterrorist capabilities of the United States government were in full vigor. What's being dismantled now, incorrectly, to go refocus on China and all, was probably the greatest, most effective tool we've maybe ever created.
Right.
And I'm talking not just CIA, but the entire U.S. intelligence community and the U.S. military.
Right.
That we were up on step. If you're a bad guy trying to bring harm to the United States, you were going to have experts coming after you.
Oh, yeah.
And probably taking you out. Yeah. I mean, the homeland has not been attacked since 9/11. There's a reason for that.
Right.
Which we've been very vigorous in prosecuting operations.
Absolutely. So
and again, with the other IC components, I'm the first one. And this is a CIA-centric discussion, but it's a team effort.
Sure.
I was involved enough on the Abbottabad and on the periphery of the UBL stuff to say that, Yes, CIA did ultimately connect some dots, but there were some very brave SEAL Team 6 guys who traveled into Pakistan. And by the way, it was the entire community. You couldn't have done it without NSA.
Right.
You couldn't have done it without NGA. And you couldn't have done it without DIA. It's just amazing how many people actually contributed if you look at it. So it was a truly team effort.
Yeah, it was wild. I think it was our intelligence community at its best, if you ask me.
It was. And then back to Kabul Station, we were embedded. We had LNOs from all those organizations.
Of course.
And then we call them exchange hostages. We exchanged them back and forth, and they worked together. But it goes on to this day.
So fast forward to today. We have the largest ground war in Europe since World War II. What's your assessment of what's going on?
Yeah, Ukraine is fascinating. I stopped sort of missing the old days a couple of years ago, and then Ukraine came, and now I miss the old days again.
Yeah.
Because I have to figure where we would be. And I think a lot of what my old outfit is doing is more analogous to what I was when I was first started.
Mm-hmm.
More hands-off, more training, more advising, more equipping. But it's absolutely fascinating. I mean, it's also an intelligence community success. You remember, people forget now, the U.S. government was saying he is going to attack.
Oh, they called it.
Even some of our allies, not the ones informed, didn't believe it. Zelensky didn't believe it.
Yeah, if you look at Kyiv and everything, they didn't have any sort of blockade set up, right? Even like 2 days before.
Exactly. But all that said, their response has been one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen.
Unbelievable.
And kudos to them for withstanding this brutal attack and repulsing it, and now taking the offensive.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely fascinating. I know your background is cyber and technology, and that's where this war is different. This is bringing to bear technology in a way that we've never seen before.
Yeah.
Which is showing what's going to happen in the future, clearly.
Yeah.
We think it's sophisticated now. Well, we stand off against China. But it's amazing because some of it's government to Ukraine support, undoubtedly, but a lot of it is the Ukrainians themselves unilaterally doing this with young people who are well-versed in technology and taking on a world superpower and, frankly, handing them their heads in many cases.
Yeah, I mean, the damage they've done to their armor is unbelievable. It's just showing the power of some of these more distributed systems. Like I don't know how much of this is true. It's just from an article I read, but I read like leveraging Starlink's cell service. They wrote apps before they got kind of our artillery to start calling in artillery via the app, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. And then you see I don't know if you watch or read. I read I think the Ukraine subreddit or Ukraine War Video Report. Every morning I wake up and every night I go to bed because you get a lot of ground footage and you get a really good sense of kind of what's going on, as much as you can from standoff, a lot more than you can get from the news.
No, you're right. And I think the government's taking advantage of learning lessons learned, our government, watching this and seeing applicability to future conflicts. But the pace of adoption of technology is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, the Russians have tried to take down their cell systems and they just can't do it because they built in instant redundancy and resiliency. It didn't exist before. And then making it up on the fly. I also like, they don't have the long-term government acquisition cycles that we still possess here in the United States government, and other governments do. If something doesn't work one day, they discard and go next.
Yeah, that is one thing I think to learn. Like some of the procurement in the U.S. government is just difficult to deal with.
It is. It is.
Yeah, it was interesting. I read another article that when the Russians came in, a lot of their comms and their encrypted comms didn't work, so they were relying on cell phone and cell towers, which is kind of a bad plan for them.
It always was a bad plan, and now it's worse. I mean,
really
you're really bad. A, we know what you're doing. We know where you're saying it from.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It's tough for longevity when you're leveraging that technology. So where do you see this going? If you're in your kind of old role, how do you think about, kind of shaping an outcome?
Well, I think,
or helping to shape.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm kind of agree with the administration's handling of this. Some people don't. Some very smart friends of mine are to the right of me on this. I'm not necessarily where they're at about how we should be doing so much more. Again, I can't forget the fact that he's nuclear-armed power. Yeah. He's a godless individual, evil person who I think is capable of anything in extremis. So I think we have to weigh carefully how the actions that we take. All that said, I think what we've done has been prudent, been measured, You could argue they can give them F-16s, give them
Yeah.
more tanks. Well, with what we are giving them, they're doing quite well.
Yeah.
They've stopped the advance, and reversed in many cases, and are on the cusp of a counteroffensive.
Major offensive. Yeah,
Exactly.
it'll be really interesting to see. I think the part that's I can't wrap my head around it. I'm always thinking, obviously, about kind of this event, and yeah, he is a nuclear power. Obviously, that has other massive world consequences, and could lead to him getting removed. But when he gets desperate enough, it gets challenging to predict what he would do next.
I agree completely. And people say, well, he's not suicidal. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know his physical condition. I don't know what point he says, well, this is,
Yeah.
go out.
At some point, nothing left to lose.
And of course, we don't have to talk about a major nuclear exchange. You could do a small device.
Sure.
Like the kind we talked about earlier, maybe even in a relatively benign area.
Yeah.
There's threat issues. Then what do we do?
It's a real pickle. The part I've been thinking quite a bit, and obviously it's been reported in the news. I think they've kind of mined the hell out of reactor 4 at that nuclear reactor, and I think that if there was ever gonna go radiological, I think it would be more a pretext to take that one out and make a mess.
So I fully agree. That one concerns me greatly.
Massively.
On the question, how does it end? God only knows. But a popular notion that I subscribe to is the only effective way is Putin has to leave the scene.
Yeah.
The sad thing is that a lot of smart analysts are saying, well, what replaces him could be worse. It could be a hardliner. I mean, in a perfect world, it's someone who says, blame it all on Putin and try to, rejoin the world. So I don't know if I'm hopeful that is the way it's going to unfold.
Yeah.
Because right now it's going to be a long, long conflict with a lot more death. Because even if the counteroffensive is successful, it's going to take a long time to dislodge them. And at this point, I fully understand where Zelensky and the Ukrainians are coming from. They want the Crimea. They want it all back.
Yeah, they want it all back.
So, there's many people talking about the only way to end this isn't through negotiation. Well, that means Putin's still holding on to something, right? And I don't see the Ukrainians going for that.
Yeah, it's interesting to me is, as this escalates and the Russians get more desperate, what is their naval? The Ukrainians don't have a naval strategy to really get rid of it. I mean, they've been doing those really interesting kind of drone boat attacks. I don't know if you've kind of watched some of the videos. They're very, very ingenious attacks. Hard to detect them too because they're kind of so low.
Semi-submerged, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of brilliant. But yeah, that's the interesting. I can't see how this ends personally. You can't. It's so unpredictable at this point. But I think it's going to be a long, drawn out, affair. And it'll leave Russia and just, really maybe switching gears is pretty reliant on China. And China having a dominant position on them.
True, yeah, you're exactly right. A situation we don't want, but China's going to have to bear a lot of anger from the world from the position that they're holding now. Let alone if they see being more supportive of Russia. It's united NATO in a way that we needed it to be.
Yeah,
it's increased defense budgets.
It sure did.
It's increased the size of NATO.
I would have thought that.
There's a lot of talk about holding the alliance together. I don't see that as a bigger concern that some people do.
Right.
It seems to me people are pretty well united on this.
Yeah.
We're in a position where we're saying whoa to a lot of our allies, the neighboring states and all.
Oh, they want to take a more aggressive position. Hungary's a really interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, very interesting.
I can't figure that one out. I don't know that part of the world well enough, but it seems like...
that one's a tough one. And where he comes down on this, in many ways, he has Putin-like qualities.
It does.
Yeah, so that's not good.
Yeah.
But they're not a major player in this NATO equation.
Of course.
So fascinating. It's going to be with us for sadly for a long time.
Yeah.
It appears.
I agree. Now, obviously, you touched on something earlier about, kind of CTC being massive and resources having to shift to handle probably in my opinion, the greatest geopolitical, peer. And everyone used the word near peer. Maybe that's right, but I think might as well just think peer so we can address it, appropriately. How do you see the U.S. national security infrastructure and, business infrastructure tackling, the kind of China problem? What do you see as kind of areas where we're underinvested in your opinion?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'm glad you talked about China. As I mentioned, it's the elephant in the room.
Yeah,
and
sure
we talk about Ukraine's horrific, and front and center. But the China issue is that is a true peer.
Yeah.
And maybe surpassed us in a number of areas. Yeah. But there is hope. There's a great book I was talking about called Danger Zone, the coming conflict with China. And in it does a counter-narrative that China is a peaked power, that China, and because of demographics, because of their economy, the demographics you can't downplay. There's so many aspects of it.
Right.
The fact they're not going to have sufficient workers, and they're going to have this aging,
a massive aging
population. The Belt Road Initiative hasn't worked out the way they thought.
Right.
United States has many more allies. They've growing the AUKUS agreements with the Australians and the Brits. So there's a lot of issues. And the point of the danger zone is that they point to historical precedent where nations that have peaked and realize they've peaked, they won't necessarily admit it, will lash out and do something to try to regain their stature. And of course, that speaks to Taiwan.
Right.
Which is obviously the conflict potentially at hand. So, yeah, the areas that the Chinese are arguably ahead of us. Maybe it's AI. Maybe it could be quantum computing, both of which are game changers in ways that I don't even understand.
Right.
Technologists have a hard time articulating.
Yeah.
But it's massive. But I do see some hope for us. The U.S. has to adapt. We've been focused on CT, obviously, for 20 years. We're good. And it's not like it's just traumatic difficulty to lift and shift.
Right.
Now, we don't have the workforce, the intel community. We have to readapt. Like the CT expert is not necessarily now geared towards China. That's not conducive. So it's going to be different. The Marine Corps is going through this massive reorganization.
They sure are.
Very unpopular by certain former Marine Corps.
I've been reading a lot of the articles and opinion pieces,
But people that I really respect say it was needed.
Right.
And it's focused on the major target set. So I think those kind of changes, that kind of breaking of China, so to speak, it has to be done if we're going to prepare ourselves for this coming fight. And again, we can't do it alone. You know, our share, our dominance in the world is still massive, but it's not what it once was from an economic standpoint. Well, we need our allies. Yeah. And, the different partnerships that we have, we need to do as many as we can.
Strong economy, yeah. The thing about China that bothers me, this is the intel opinion, is that's a damn hard language to learn with a lot of dialects, and English is easier to learn, and there's a heck of a lot more people on that side that can interpret and process data than we can on our side, and which kind of, targeting those types of organizations, like, it's much harder. It's much, much harder. And this is where I think a massive investment and, kind of AI and language processing, because we almost have this imbalance of processing throughout.
Yeah,
and it's a challenge, right? And also, if it ever became kind of a, more of something hot, I think, kind of look back to World War II when Japan attacked the U.S. It wasn't like our military was monstrous then, but we had an industrial base that was monstrous.
Right.
There's a balance of power issue there now too, where they would have the capacity to produce at a massive scale, and they're investing, what I'm seeing, so much in Africa and mining and rare earths and dominating Africa is concerning.
Very concerning. Of course, they're all part of the Belt Road Initiative, and you're already seeing cracks in that.
Yeah.
Just today I was reading an article about them calling in some of their loans. Well, how are they going to handle that?
Yeah, there's some angry people. They loan shark all these poor countries and take their ports.
Right, they do. And yes, the dirty leader, respective country, has taken his payoffs. Yeah. But his people are now left holding this bag, and so I don't know. I think they have a tough road ahead of them with the world as they try to call in some of the chips that they've the bets that they've made.
Yeah, I mean, even feeding the population, you're watching they've definitely invested a lot in their naval fleet and their whole shipbuilding industry, and you're watching them kind of push out and start overfishing waters all the way out. I mean, that's a whole nother issue.
It is. Part of it is the economic issues, the ecological issues.
Yeah.
I mean, they're in bad shape.
Yeah.
From water to other things. So, as this unfolds, I think, again, we're going to see the narrative that China isn't invincible. It has to convince its people it is.
Right.
But they're eventually going to see the cracks themselves. We saw some of that with the mishandling of the COVID lockdowns and how they had to do a full-scale retreat. That's not Xi's style.
Oh, they
but
did.
He had a full-scale retreat. He realized, wait a minute, I got a Tiananmen on my hands here.
Yeah, I mean, there's, those style governments, or whether it's the Iranians, there's nothing they fear more than a uprising of their people internally. That scares them more than anything.
Exactly, and it's a police state, and the technology thrown against it. Much of the technology derived or stolen from the West, keeps a lockdown on their population. To the point you were making. Yeah, I mean, they know who is saying what and when. Social scores. Yeah, it's crazy. But we've also seen old school brutality against the Uyghurs.
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
Concentration camps with millions of people being re-educated, forced sterilizations. I mean, just things that the world should look at and say, this is not the country to lead the new world order.
Yeah, it sure isn't. Yeah, imagine them in Russia. They think they should be leading it. Unbelievable. Phil, you've obviously had an absolutely unbelievably decorated and interesting career. I mean, you must be an insatiable reader to keep your mind, going with all those different experiences. What would you leave, top 3 lessons you learned from your career that you think are applicable, to kind of folks running businesses or just operating in the commercial world?
I mentioned surround yourself with good people,
right,
and recognize the strong and recognize the weak. They're equally important traits. I got to think for a second.
I know, it's tricky.
Yeah, no,
I'll give you one, the physical fitness. I think that's a big, big, big one, keeping yourself in shape.
It is. It's very important because it gets you through things.
Yeah.
As you get broken down and, you go for weeks where you can't work out because you're too busy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a residual you can fall back on.
Yeah. I always figure it helps you kind of de-stress. You know what they call it, the 2 point? You're an endurance athlete, right? You know that feeling after you just gas yourself fully, right? You feel great for the rest of the night.
You feel great.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I've got knee issues now. I can't do those, pushing myself to those points. Right. But, when you did, and it's counterintuitive, but you just really push yourself.
Yeah.
But you just feel great.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's science behind what that is, endorphins and everything. And
oh, yes. Yeah, no question. Now, just to kind of touch on one more topic, you were an ultra marathoner, weren't you? When did you do this?
I did that in Africa mostly.
Okay.
In Africa, yeah.
Appropriate place.
As you get older, you can no longer be a mid-distance runner, mile or half miler. That's not conducive for a guy in his 30s and doing a job. So you generally can go, and everyone does this. You run half marathons.
Sure.
But I got into doing some ultras and. Because I was in Africa, I did the Comrades Marathon, which if you were South Africa, you know what that is. It's an international rite of passage.
Oh.
From Durban to Pietermaritzburg, uphill one year, downhill the next year. And they've been doing it since the 20s. And they get 20,000 people.
Unbelievable.
Yeah,
wow.
And it's 55 miles, roughly. They change it up slightly each year, 56, 54.
How long does that take?
It takes a while. I did 3 silvers, silver being sub 7:30. So I did it. My fastest was 6:34, 6 hours 34 minutes, about 134th, I think. Again, there was a lot of good people in front of me, but I was a big guy.
Yeah,
6'4". That's tall for an ultra guy.
Unbelievable.
But a lot of fun. I love the ultras, and because you push yourself.
Yeah.
So I was never a team sport guy.
Right.
Most people are. I got it in that sense. I'm not the greatest American, so I don't really know football and baseball, but. Solo sports where you're pushing yourself, it's fantastic.
They're my favorite type. Obviously, I didn't play a hardcore sport as a tennis player, but I love the one-on-one competition because it's a binary outcome. You know where you stand at the end.
And you can push against other people, but you also push against yourself.
Yeah,
just to finish some things.
Sure,
it's just a challenge.
Sure. Excellent. Well, Phil, it's an absolute delight chatting with you. You have a wonderful career and. You go down as history as one of the more impactful Americans in our national security space. So I thank you for all your service for all the years, and thank you for coming on the show.
John, very kind of you. Thank you very much.
All right.